Welcome back. I'm your host, Layla Brown, and in this episode of Cesar, we will talk about the continued dictatorial regime in Cuba under Fidel Castro's 50-year reign. In the last episode, I mentioned that Castro sent out a team of assassins to kill former president of Cuba, Fulgencio Batista, after Batista voluntarily exiled himself to Spain to live out the rest of his days. But I'd like to rewind a little and give you a better understanding of Castro's character and political influences that led him to rule with such an iron fist, as well as the impact his governing had on the Cuban people. Fidel Castro came to power by leading the 26th of July movement in a guerrilla war that overthrew Cuban dictator Fulgencio Batista in 1959. His popularity was certainly the thing that solidified his role as prime minister and established Cuba as a socialist state. By now, you should start to see that a common trend in this country is seizing power through violent techniques or in short coups. In this case, if you can create enough uproar in people who despise the current president, you don't exactly have to promote democracy. Look at Fidel Castro. He promoted Marxism, which was the belief that eventually the lower class would uprise against the upper class and seize power. But as we continue, you're going to see how leaders' ideology may be loosely based in protecting the public, or it usually starts that way in the case of Cuban dictators. But as time goes on, it starts to shape into something more malicious and greedy. The way I think about Marxism, which is Karl Marx's idea of the lower classes seizing power from the upper class, is kind of like a Robin Hood situation where you're stealing from the poor and giving to the rich, but at the same time, how far is the poor allowed to take it with indulging in stolen wealth before the new class of poor people who used to be rich overthrow them? Is that justified? Over time, this form of governing suppresses individual people's rights because there is no central authority. People can easily justify violating other people's human rights simply because they are part of a different class. And to me, it just seems like a never ending cycle. Why would you want to keep progressing a society in this kind of loosely governed state? But while Marx's ideas to repair classism is a temporary fix, it doesn't address potential criticisms. Back to Fidel Castro, though. Once in office, Castro tried to improve social conditions by increasing citizens' access to health care, housing, and education. However, according to Radio Liberty, those achievements came at the cost of crushing his fellow citizens' rights to voice criticism or form political parties. According to activist groups and Cuban exiles, the system he built continues suppressing human rights in Cuba today, despite Fidel's handing of power to his brother Raul in 2008 and increasing economic liberalization. So basically, this quote is trying to say that people in Cuba are still suffering from Castro's reign. And although he did some good things, it kind of goes back to the idea of, with Marxism, of the poor seizing the power of the rich. It almost takes some people's voices away because not everybody wants to do that. Anyway, to continue, Fidel Castro's reign was characterized by suppression and greed, according to citizens and government officials. Today, many activists suffered the effects of Castro's reign, as I previously mentioned. For example, activists can face arrest or harassment charges for petitioning against the government. This brings the main segment of today's podcast to an end, but I'd like to end on a lighter note and play a lightning round of dictator or celebrity. In this game, you'll guess whether a dictator said it or a celebrity said it. The first quote goes as follows: "History will be kind to me, for I intend to write it." You'll have 5 seconds to guess if this was said by a dictator or a celebrity. Once again, history will be kind to me, for I intend to write it. If you said this quote was from a dictator, you would be incorrect because this quote was actually said by Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Next up, was this quote said by a dictator or a celebrity? A revolution is a struggle between the future and the past. Interestingly enough, this quote was said by the star of today's episode, Fidel Castro. Now for our last quote. Was this said by a celebrity or a dictator? I don't follow trends, I set them. I think this quote was a little bit more obvious, but if you didn't already say it, this was said by a celebrity, Kanye West. Well, that wraps up today's topic on Cuban dictators. I hope you'll join us for next week's episode, but until then, I'm Layla. Thank you for tuning in to yet another episode of Cesar.